Okay, it says recording.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we'll start from. All right, so now we're just going to talk about what is manding. Can you guys see this again?
Yep.
Okay, good. So it's requesting. The learner's getting the things that they want, and when we're motivated for something, we request it. And that's when we mand for it. And we're going to talk a lot about motivation because that is key in our manding. So there's lots of different examples of mands. And I think that we often think of it this way with items and actions. So we think about items, a cookie, books, actions, tickles, hug, chase me, all those fun things. It's also people, mom, dad, Miss Troyer was my favorite example. But it also is things like missing items. So we'll talk a lot more about how that looks, but that could be something from a routine, like, you know, you're going to brush your teeth and your toothbrush isn't there. So then you'd say toothbrush because you need that in order to complete something. You can also mand for information. Where's the dog? What encore do I have today? Things like that. You can also mand for attention. Look at me, come here. Those are all really good ones for that social interaction. And then there's my favorite, aversives, go away and stop, which I use frequently to this day with my brother. So all really important skills to have. So why do we teach manding? It's super important. It helps the student avoid frustration when communicating wants and needs. I think we all know that if you can't get your wants and needs across, you're going to be pretty upset. So it's really important to start with that. It's easy to do. We can use motivation as a tool to teach. We want to be teaching them to request the things that they want. It promotes self-advocacy, and it helps the student control their environment. And it's really a natural first step in teaching functional communication, because if you can control your environment, get your wants and needs fulfilled, that's really powerful. And we address all different response forms. So that means how the student is manding. So we can do a vocal request. So that would just be saying the word or the sentence leader or the question, sign language, or it could be an AAC device like Proloquo to go, things like that. They're all response forms that we accept. But we can also use a combination of any of those. And we can also communicate with things like gestures, body language, frowning, smiling. You can tell what people want from those things, but usually we see that a lot of our kids already have those mastered, so we target those vocal requests, sign language, and AAC instead. Now we'll talk about motivation with Kim Bender. Hold on, I'm unmuting you.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And just one thing as we're going through this presentation, I would encourage everybody, even if it's, you know, not your first time learning about what manding is and why we do it and why it's important, I'd encourage you to think about your own mands and your own communication that you do throughout your day, because this does not apply to just the students that we teach or your children. It applies to everybody. And there's, with my own kids, with adults, with anybody that you're communicating with, there are thousands of mands and requests that we ourselves emit throughout our day. And it's really the most crucial skill that we can have. And if we didn't have it, there's a lot we wouldn't have access to. A lot of things regarding our own safety, our own basic wants and needs, a lot of things that we wouldn't have available to us, and we would really, really struggle functioning in society if we didn't have that kind of skill. So I just encourage you to kind of think about that. One of the behavior analysts that I've worked with and we work with at Patan had sat in, it sounds a little strange, but he sat in a coffee shop, I think a Starbucks or a Panera Bread, and he wrote down in an hour all of the different mands that he heard people emitting in Panera Bread. And the number of things that you would hear, requests for a drink, your food, Maybe you need change back, or they didn't take your money, or there's no more coffee in the coffee pot and you had to go ask at the desk, or your food's taking a really long time. I think that there is a lot of things we kind of forget and we take for granted with our own communication, and the importance of having that skill. So this is, something that we really work on, and it's a main focus in some of the students that we teach in your children, because it's such an important life skill. So I just would kind of encourage you to think about that in your own language, how much and how many mands and the different types of mands that you emit throughout your day, or that you hear in your household with your family or friends. But going back to motivation, motivation is really what drives a man. If we don't have motivation for something, we're not requesting. You're not going to request for something that you don't want or that you don't need. So it's really the only type of language and communication that relies solely on motivation. And for some of our students, we have to capture that or contrive it in order to bring those requests out. So talking a little bit about motivation, why it's so important. I don't see the slide changing. Do I have access to do that, or?
I just changed it, but let's see.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Okay, good.
So again, why it's so important is because it's a life skill and we utilize it, and it's really a survivor skill. We need it. We need to be able to we need to have functional communication. We should really only teach requests for things, actions, information that our kids want in the moment. We don't want to teach them rote responses. We don't want them to request for something that they really don't want, because then you're not building that independent functional communication. You're just teaching a rote response that they might echo, but they really don't want that thing that you're having them ask for. So you want to avoid rote responses and really just kind of capture motivation in the moment. So what that's going to look like, it's going to look different depending on your child. For some, we call it the search. When you see the search, whether it's looking for something, pointing at something, walking towards something, reaching, starting to communicate, maybe it's engaging in problem behavior. Maybe they're pushing somebody away or something away. Maybe they're turning their head. You're going to be able to tell if motivation is there when you see those kinds of what we're calling search type behaviors. So motivation's there if someone's looking around the room, they're walking towards it, they're pointing, they're starting to say something, maybe problem behavior, or they're running away and they're, avoiding something or turning away. You know that motivation for something is there is if you see those signs right there. We use this motivation to teach the requests and the vocalizations, or the sign or the AAC that we want our students to be utilizing. So when we know something is valuable, that's when we're going to teach it. But sometimes we might not have as many natural opportunities to teach that. So we want to, we set up our environment so we can capture that motivation and we can contrive it. So what that really means is that we are manipulating, sabotaging, changing around that environment in some way to get these requests out and get more opportunities for the request. So if we're capturing motivation, you're going to do that just by watching what your child is doing naturally. And then you're just going to capture it. You're going to see something, you're going to see motivation, you're going to go right there in the moment, and you're going to prompt a request, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you just always kind of on the lookout for those signs, capture it in the moment, and use that moment to teach a new mand or a new request. We're constantly looking for those opportunities, and mands come in a lot of different forms, which we'll talk about. But again, capturing, just watching what your child's doing, capture that natural motivating moment, and get ready to prompt a request for them. Contriving is a little bit different. You actually have to do a little bit more work here. You're not just capturing what they're doing in the moment and jumping in. You're actually purposely kind of sabotaging or setting up situations to withhold what they want. Or if you're getting them to request for something aversive to stop, you're kind of poking the bear a little bit. You might be doing something kind of annoying that gets on their nerves, or that that they don't like. So instead of getting problem behavior, you're teaching a request for stop or move away, or, you know, can I have that back, or can we leave? So you're either withholding something they really want or something that they need, playing with it, making it look really valuable to them, having them go on that search and build that motivation a little bit, and then prompt the request and deliver. So we have to do this a lot in the classroom, and it's easy to do a lot of this at home, so you can build the motivation for that. If there's just free access to everything that they need, and they're independent and they're getting all of their needs met, you might be missing that opportunity to build those mands and improve that functional communication. So any situation you can think of, you want to capture and contrive to build motivation. So these two terms look a little bit scary, but I'll just give the brief overview. There are two factors for all of us that are going to make requests and functional communication and motivation easier or more challenging. So the principle of satiation just means that we have something so much that we get tired of it. So if you eat the same thing for lunch, you're on a new diet, you're eating the same couple foods for lunch over and over and over and over again, now I'm tired of it and I don't want it anymore, and I don't even want to look at that food. Thanksgiving time, you know, you have lots of turkey, lots of stuffing, all of that food. By the time the holiday is over, you don't want any of it. That's because you're satiated on it. I mostly drink water, but I get really over water and I'm looking for other drinks because I have access to it a lot. So when you have access to something a lot, we call that satiation, and you might not want it anymore. It's going to get old. It's going to get boring. You're going to be looking for other things. So if we give too much access to things that a child wants, needs, loves, they're going to get bored over it pretty quickly. So we try to keep things really fresh. We don't want to get into a situation where there's satiation happening, because we're going to lose the ability to keep that mand in their repertoire and keep their motivation strong. So be careful of that and make sure you're kind of mixing and varying the things that you're working on building mand-wise at home, so you're not having, you know, your child or your sibling get too much free access to those things, because they'll eventually get over it. What we like to do instead is use principles of deprivation, which means we're going to withhold items more so they want more of it. That's going to increase your motivation. Kind of going along with the diet theme, why most diets don't work, there's principles of behavior there. If you deprive yourself of food that you really love for so long, eventually you're going to end up breaking that diet and just splurging and eating a lot of those things that you're not supposed to, and then you're going to feel terrible about yourself, and you're going to be restarting your diet over, and everyone always gets in that cycle. So you know, we can use deprivation to our advantage, though, if we do withhold these things and we only have a little bit at a time or access to it for a little bit. We'll get more motivation for it. It will be something the learner wants more frequently, and we can use it to our advantage. So we definitely try to deprive to an extent, so we keep that motivation strong.
Oh, you already kind of did this. Do you want me to go?
I forgot to look at my notes here. I don't know what I was repeating or not, but yeah. So again, here's how you can avoid satiation. I kind of already addressed that, but put items out of reach. Don't allow free access to things a lot. Don't allow, you know, kind of access to the same type of snacks, desserts, toys. You want to be able to be in control of some of those items so satiation doesn't happen. You want to vary what you do with those items. So a ball could be really motivating, could be really fun, but if all I'm ever doing is just throwing a ball back and forth and playing catch, I might quickly get over playing catch or playing with a ball. But if I get a new ball out and I can now bounce on a ball, or I can bounce past a ball, if I can throw it really high in the air. Same thing, we have another example there with a balloon. If you just blow up a balloon or hold a balloon, that might get boring. But if you play keep it up with the balloon, or you let the balloon go and all the air comes out, or you pop the balloon, motivation is going to stay stronger. I'm going to stay with that activity longer because there's a bunch of different ways now that they've made it fun, and I'm not getting satiated on it. So it's really about kind of continuing to enrich, continuing to vary what you do with items, keep them exciting, keep them fresh, so you avoid satiation. You don't want to give the same activity or the same item or the same thing that you do over and over and over again. It's going to get really boring for you too. I know myself, I've been really tired of playing Paw Patrol with my daughter at home. She asks for it all day long. It's the same thing. It's getting really boring for me, and I'm finding that I'm avoiding and finding every excuse under the sun as to why I can't play Paw Patrol with her. So I have to find ways to, she's probably deprived of it at this point, and why she's asking me so much because I keep ignoring her requests. But if it's not fun for you, it's probably going to eventually not be fun for them. So, if we continue to do the same thing, it's going to get really boring for everybody and no one's going to want to do it. So you got to find ways to freshen it up, do more fun things, or switch the activity altogether and hide Paw Patrol. And now we'll do something different and bring Paw Patrol back in a few days. So again, I know it is easier for us at school. Just keep in the back of your mind, there are still little things that you can do at home to make these small manipulations. Deprive, contrive, capture, all of that can be done at home. It just might take a little bit of creative thinking, and hopefully this gives you some tips, and we're always here to help as well.
All right. So then how do we take all of this good stuff that they just talked about and teach it? One thing I just want to touch base about is we're going to talk about teaching MANs, but there are a lot of students, have known MANs, so you wouldn't do the same procedure. Just reach out to your teacher. A lot of us do have their skills tracking sheets of mastered items. There's probably some things at home, that they can independently ask for, but when you're finding new things that they're motivated for and want to teach it, these are the procedures that we use within the school setting. So the first one, you're going to notice that all of these models kind of stay the same. We're going to go through teaching specific MANs, and then what it looks like to teach actions, and then missing items, and then information. They all have a check and a model and deliver, but kind of what we're looking for is just a little bit different in all of those teaching strategies. So when we're teaching specific MANs, we want to check for motivation. That's always going to be the very first step. Kim talked about the importance of motivation, and if we don't check for it, we might run the risk of teaching, some rote responses, or teaching kids to ask things when they don't really want it. So we want to make sure it's there. Again, Kim kind of talked about that. That looks like reaching, looking, walking towards something. So when you see that motivation is there, you model the response form, whether the response form is sawing, whether it's vocalizations on their AAC device. You do that first model and then allow them to repeat it, and then you deliver it after they say it. So an example could be, let's do the sign for water. So Annie, do you want to be the student?
Sure.
So Annie really wants water. I see her like running towards the water fountain, and I beat her there because I'm super fast. And I stop her right in front of the water fountain, and I go, water.
Water.
Good. Water, good. And then I'll say, water, you asked for water. And then I give her access to the water. So that would be an example of teaching a specific MAN. For someone that's using an AAC device, might look a little bit different. You would stop and block still, but you would go and find that word on their talker first, and then independently have them press the button. The next thing is teaching for specific items and actions, more specifically actions here. So that's going to be things like bounce, push, jump. So some ways you can contrive that, again, for example, Annie's on a swing. She's having so much fun on a swing, and I hold the straps now, and she can't get that same swinging motion. But I know she really wants it because she was just swinging. She's trying to do it herself, but I'm kind of like blocking that access to it. And she's kind of, not sure what to do. So I'll do vocal this time. Push,
Push.
Good, push. And then I'm going to push her. So that's a way to do actions. All right, and then another type of man to teach is missing items. So the two mans we kind of just talked about, the item is present or the action is very clearly, you know, happening. Maybe you stopped it. But this is, you know, a little bit of more challenging skill when the item is completely out of sight and they have to ask for it. So one example of a way we can do this is if a student's doing a puzzle and now there's one missing piece, and you see them kind of like they're looking, maybe now they're like up and they're going through drawers and they're doing everything but coming to you and asking for the puzzle piece. What you would want to do is when you start to see those searching behaviors, you would want to prompt. Annie will go again. So Annie's looking frantically for the puzzle piece, and I say puzzle or puzzle piece.
Puzzle piece.
All right, puzzle piece, I'm going to show you where it is, and then I can go get it or direct her to go find it herself.
Okay.
All right, and then steps for teaching man for information. This is, I would say, and Kim and Annie, let me think, like one of the most, not challenging, but it's something that I feel like we as adults do a lot of. We do a lot of all the other ones too, but this involves some very complex language to be able to do these man successfully. So checking for motivation for these is going to look a little bit different. So this one has, you know, you might say something like, it's not time for lunch. Your kid's really hungry. Annie's really hungry. And she comes up and says, and she's trying to get all of her food out. And I say, it's not time for lunch. And she still is like trying to get food. And then I could prompt her to say, what time is it? What time is it for? Or what time is lunch? And then give her the answer to that. So information looks a little different because they're not getting the item. They're not getting access to the item, but they're motivated to have the information. So an example that just happened to me, my dogs were like really bugging my husband, Eric, because they wanted their food. So he came in and said, you know, did the dogs eat or when did the dogs eat? Because that information was valuable to him to get the dogs like off of his back. So then I said, yeah, I already fed them. And then it ended. But he came in and was motivated to ask me that question because he was going to feed them. All right. This is a list of some of the best reinforcers to use and why. So number one, things that can be as much as possible controlled by you. So for example, in the swinging, you're in control of the push. You can kind of stop and you can push them as wanted. Also, same with phones and iPads, if possible. I know this is a lot of things that kids use for free time, but if you do have an opportunity to be able to, even sometimes at school, I would use my phone. I would keep my hand kind of on the phone to be able to pause and press play, just so kids didn't just, you know, run away with my phone and get free access to things. Another big component to good reinforcers is things that can be delivered really quickly. So for example, tickles are immediate. You can immediately give that. Hugs, anything that's readily available and nearby. So for example, if someone asks for goldfish crackers and you say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go get them, and you still want to reinforce it. I'm not saying you don't want to give things that are out of sight, but if they have to wait, you know, for you, they ask for goldfish crackers and now you have to go down to the basement and get in your back cabinet where they're stored, where you have, you know, all of your, you know, stock shelf food or whatever, that time has like really elapsed, and there might be other behaviors that were done in between them asking that could be reinforced. So you want to just make sure it's as close to the request as possible. Another thing is can be delivered in small quantities. So what we kind of talked about, limiting that access when possible. So if they ask for a goldfish cracker, you might only give them 3 instead of the full bag, because if you give them 3, then you can get more requests after that. You may sit down with them for a snack or for lunch and they have the goldfish crackers there, and instead of just giving them the whole bag, you could sit there with them and give them every time they ask. You might be able to get, instead of 1 request, you might be able to get 7 or 8 in a small snack pack of goldfish. Allow only a short amount of contact or are consumable. So for example, edibles are a great example. Kids are usually hungry. Snack time and lunchtime are a perfect time for manned or requesting sessions, and the food goes away. So they get a piece of it and it's gone, and they have to ask for it again. So things that are easily diminished afterwards. I don't know if there's any other, I'm trying to think of other examples other than edibles that can go away quickly. Kim, were you going to say something?
Social attention usually are
good,
things that
yeah.
you can do in short bursts so that, you know, they can go away pretty quickly. You can provide attention, whether that's playing for a minute, singing a song, hugs, a game, you know, something that can be done pretty quick, and then it can go away, and you can get another request out. So a lot of social reinforcers are ones that can be used in that way as well.
Perfect. And then the last thing is just making sure that the child is able to do the response form. So you want to look at what their motor capabilities are, how hard it might be to find in their AAC device, how hard it might be to say, and also how easy for all of those things. So can they get close? Can water right now, can it just be this? And then eventually we can try to get it here. So always keep that in mind too, to just make sure to see where their capabilities are and what they're able to do. However, you know, if you have a student that is a signer and isn't yet making vocal approximations, you always want to be modeling what the actual, you know, item or action is. So if Annie does not emit vocalizations, but she asks for water, and I would say, good, you asked for water. So I'm always going to say it and I'll sign it back to her, but always make sure to add that sound. All right. So we're just going to talk about some different errors.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because we have a good parent question here.
Good.
And this is a great question, and I hear this often from classroom teachers or staff. You know, they love this so much, but they just like to eat it. So the question was, what about Play-Doh and putty? My child loves that, but likes to eat it. What should I do? And this is something common that we see. It's something really motivating, but it's either they don't utilize it appropriately, or it's maybe not age appropriate. Maybe the child's 21 and they're really love Elmo. You know, what do we do with that? We want to capture motivation, but if it's not appropriate, then how do we navigate that? Or if they don't utilize it appropriate, how do we navigate that? So one thing that I always recommend, you don't want to remove it, because again, you have that motivation. You want to utilize that, capture it. You could get 2 new requests for your child, Play-Doh and putty, and giving them access to requests for that. So what you might have to do first is condition and model and teach what to do with the Play-Doh and the putty while you're still modeling the name of it. So you, in very small bursts, I recommend just in close proximity. You're not going to get free access, because the more that the child gets access to putting it in their mouth or eat it, the more likely they're going to continue to do that behavior in the future, because there's something that they are liking about the taste or the smell or the texture of that Play-Doh or putty. So I would first just work on building that, you know, appropriate use of putty. Get some toys out, roll with it, model it, do a bunch of different activities with it, because that might help if they are more motivated to, oh, I'm sorry, I just got distracted for a second looking at that second question, which is also a very good question. So if they are enriching what you do with the Play-Doh and putty might help to, now that's more reinforcing. I'm not even going to think or consider putting it in my mouth, because I love what we're doing with the Play-Doh and putty so much, whether you're rolling with it, you're making donuts with it, cupcakes, making different letters, whatever it is that you're doing with it. So I would try in close proximity to do a variety of different things with the Play-Doh while you're blocking access to it going into their mouth over, you know, kind of over and over and over again. So that way they start to learn that this is what I do with putty, and this is why, you know, this is also how it can be reinforcing, and I don't get access to putting it in my mouth. While you're also still pairing the word up, Play-Doh, putty, you can still have them request for it, but just make sure when you can in a controlled environment to, you know, kind of condition the use of that putty and try to do a lot of other variety of things with it. And yes, we will talk about in future topics about how to, you know, deny access to certain things, deny access to certain actions or requests that they might want that they're not allowed to have for a variety of reasons. That is one reason with that second question, what if the child is requesting something that's off limits, like candy? Maybe they've had dental work, maybe they like a food that they're allergic to. Then of course you are gonna have to deny access to that and work on giving them alternate choices. But what I would say is, if you know, what we do is we try to look for things that are of similar properties. So if I know my child really loves gummies, my son, for example, is not allowed to have them, and gummy candy was a huge reinforcer. So what I do now is I try to find things that have similar taste to it. Maybe frozen fruit that's sweet. A lollipop he is allowed to have. I know that's still candy, but he's allowed to have a lollipop because it's not gummy. So looking at things like that, looking at fresh fruit, just trying to find things that have similar properties to what that child wants. So they want candy but can't have it. What else could I try to condition and introduce that has similar properties that they might be motivated for? So when I say, no, you're not allowed to have candy, it's not available, but you can choose frozen fruit or a piece of fresh fruit instead. Or you can choose a fruit roll-up or a fruit snack, you know, something like that. So you're building alternate choices when you're denying access to that, and you're also trying to condition things that you know they love. Same goes with Play-Doh and putty. What has similar properties to that you could also condition as a reinforcer that maybe they are less likely to eat or put in their mouth. So again, I always encourage condition other things that have similar properties to build their reinforcers. You might have to deny access, but when you do deny access, always offer an alternate that's going to be similar and that's still reinforcing and they'd be motivated for. And when you're trying to condition more appropriate things to do with reinforcers, just make sure you're doing it when you're there so you can block the unwanted behavior and continue to model and reinforce more appropriate things to do with that item.
Just something to add to that too. It doesn't really address like what if it's off limits, but a way to kind of limit something like candy and what we would do in the classroom, because candy's like a hit for anybody, even me, and they just keep asking and asking. We would cut Skittles, cut Starburst, whatever candy we had, into very, very, very little pieces. So if a student, we got Skittles, I think, into 4 pieces. Some of my staff probably did not enjoy that, but we got them down to 4. So when they ask candy, they get 1 little piece of a Skittle, and they asked for candy 8 times, and they've really only got two full Skittles. So that's another way, if you're trying to limit access to some things that are sweeter, finding ways to really, really limit it is also a good strategy. All right, great questions, guys.
Yeah, I hope that helps. And if not, feel free to ask a follow-up.
So now we're going to get into errors when we talk about manding.
Yeah, so these are some things, and error, for lack of a better term, I guess these are really good teaching points, really good things that you know, people in the field of behavior analysis and language have found are good teaching points that should be addressed to help facilitate functional communication. So one thing to touch on is the word more. It is okay to teach more. We do see this a lot. However, it's so crucial to teach very specific commands. Because what ends up happening is if students only learn more, and now that item is not in sight and it's gone, now they're asking for more and you don't know what it is. So you're going to start digging through drawers. You're trying to figure out what more is. So that's why we want to teach specific mands first. If you're sitting, you know, at dinner and, you know, they ask for mac and cheese and they ask for it a few times and then they say more, that's definitely more appropriate time. But when we're first teaching requests, we want to try to make it as specific as possible, just so they have more success later on when that item is totally missing, or if they're with new people that don't know, that might not know their communication mode. So I think that's, Annie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, you'd have to follow up if there's a bunch of stuff out, you'd have to follow up with more what? Because, you know, if Kim just came up to me and said, I want more, I'd be like, okay, like, thanks, can you elaborate? So it's important to get specific because it teaches them to be independent. They don't have, we don't have to follow up with that with, do you want the water bottle or do you want the lemonade? And then, you know, it really does give them more independence. And if we start with more, then it's going to kind of decrease their motivation to learn more specific words. So that's why we target specific things.
I'd say that please and thank you also fall into that category. They're also kind of more core words that, you know, we want our students to have eventually. But, you know, more and more research is showing that as kids develop or we develop, we're using a lot more specific item requests before we even learn those core or generalized words like more, please, and thank you. Kids and babies' first words are usually things like mama, dada, ball, a specific food item that they love, a specific toy. It's usually not more, please, thank you. And again, I don't want to say that manners are not valuable. They absolutely are. You can model them, but you want to, again, be cautious, especially if your child, you know, is at an early stage with their vocalizations or their language or their sign. You want to try to avoid those because they are generalized. They're not going to have, if someone just says, please, you're not going to know that specific item, and it doesn't broaden the request across items. So those kind of specific requests are a lot better to do first. And then the more and the please and the thank you and all of that can come down the line. Just want to be cautious there.
Some other things you may see, problem behavior may serve as an effective mand. So you might see, you know, some students will climb the tables and get into the cabinets. You know, that's something we wouldn't typically accept as a request, but that happens. Or crying or hitting somebody gets them what they want. When that happens, you want to make sure that you can block any access at all possible to what they're trying to get, so they don't continue to learn. That's how I can get what I want. So we talked about different mand response forms earlier: vocalization, sign, AAC device, any combinations of those. But those are all appropriate response forms. But problem behavior is also a response form that we see in children when they are asking for things that they want. So when that we're going to talk about when that happens next, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about the errors just so you guys know some things, and then how to address them.
I'm sorry, Bree, can I just add one thing to that too? If your child is a little bit more advanced, or think about how that, again, I like to always relate it to how that applies to our life and what you see out in society, because it's the same principles. That problem behavior might not always look like climbing or screaming or crying. It could look like just whining while they say it. You know, I want ice cream. Or it could look like a customer at a restaurant that's requesting for something very rudely. You know, we would look at it as, you know, maybe they're saying it very loudly, or they're using inappropriate language as they're making their request, or they're up at the front making kind of a big ordeal. That still would be under the branch of problem behavior. And if everybody is stopping and listening to him or her and getting everything that they want for them, that behavior goes reinforced and gets strengthened over time. So it can be a variety of problem behaviors, whether it's whining, yelling, grabbing, hitting, maybe just saying it not very kindly. Some of my kids, I work in social skills groups. That's their problem with their functional communication, is just the way that they're speaking and the tone and the volume. So all of that should be addressed in the same way.
Awesome. And then another thing that we typically see or sometimes see is scrolling. So this is going to look like
I'll hold up a water bottle and you can scroll.
Perfect. So this is when a student says a variety of incorrect responses. So I want the water, and I'm going to go candy, hat, book, water. And then I get and then you're like, yes, you finally got it, the water. But now every time, Annie didn't really reinforce the water.
Mm-hmm.
She reinforced that whole chain of events happening. So now every time I see water, I'm gonna go candy, hat, book, water. And she goes, oh, you finally got it. So you just wanna be really careful there. And we're gonna talk about in the next slide what to do when you might see that happening. Annie, did you want to talk about expanding utterances?
So we definitely want to focus eventually on expanding utterances, and that is something that we do target, but we don't want to do it too soon, because when we use carrier phrases like I want ball, I want water bottle, it can lead to things like I want push more on the swing, please, because we use those carrier phrases in life really differently. I don't say I want every time I want something. I might say, can you grab me that water bottle? Would you mind picking up this at the grocery store? So they're very specific. And it can end up sounding kind of odd, but we do eventually expand the requesting utterance phrase length by incorporating things like specific mands again. So if you have a variety of balls out, you would eventually start to do things like the big ball or a yellow ball, but we also want to make sure that they have adjectives before that. That's another thing. As we teach specific mands, that ends up increasing in length naturally through how we teach it. And the last thing about that is, when you're teaching that carrier phrase, there's a lot more effort, but it's the same payoff. So if you're saying, I want gum, well, it's going to be the same if you just say gum, but it takes a lot more effort. On an AAC device, it may take a lot of effort. Obviously, if you're combining signs, it would be a lot more effortful. And if you struggle with your intelligibility, it would be a lot harder for you to say, I want gum with intelligibility than it would be to just say gum.
I think it's good to just add there too. Even though we might not be specifically teaching that, we are it's always something that should be modeled for kids as well.
And yeah, a variety of different things. Like, oh, you want the ball? That's great. And that's the longer phrase length, but it might be different every time you say it.
Awesome. Kim, do you kind of want to talk about it's like a count and man sequence?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about if there is problem behavior or they're asking for it using an inappropriate tone, or they make an error where they're scrolling. These are the ways that you want to respond to that to avoid reinforcing problem behavior and improving communication. So you want to make sure if it's problem behavior, even if it's problem behavior that was then chained with an appropriate response. My daughter right now is still kind of tantruming for things that she wants, and she might yell, I need help. Excuse me, mommy, I need help. And she might chain the two together. I am going to treat that in the same way as if she screamed help or pushed me or hit me to get my attention and get help. Because I want a clean, independent, appropriate response. So you're going to kind of withhold attention, do not deliver any item, look away, wait about 5 to 10 seconds. But for most of our kids, I usually do 5. Research will say it's better to do 10. It depends on your child and how long they're able to wait. And you really want to capture that moment. So about 5 seconds. Wait, withhold, look away, remove items, whatever you need to do, however long that problem behavior is going to go on until you get 5 clean seconds of no problem behavior. then immediately prompt the appropriate mand. So if, you know, Annie wants, let's say, water, and she's crying, I'm going to wait, and then I see her not crying anymore. I'm going to count, you know, that 5 seconds. Oh, you want water?
Water.
Perfect. Thank you. Here's your water. And I'm going to give water. So water is going to come, not because you engaged in problem behavior. It's going to come because you gave me an appropriate request. So when there's problem behavior or they're asking for it inappropriately, whatever that might look like, it will look like a variety of things. You know, you're just going to withhold attention, withhold access to any preferred items, wait 5 seconds for no problem behavior, and immediately prompt. What you want to avoid is prompting with, what do you want? Tell me what you want. Because that might evoke a whole nother tantrum or more problem behavior, because either they don't know, though they're not recalling the word, they don't know the word, or they're just not in a great, just not having a great moment. So you might need to remind it. So avoid saying, okay, thank you, what do you want? What you want to say instead is just immediately give them the mand, have them echo, and then deliver the item. So ignore, withhold, wait 5 seconds, prompt the mand, and deliver. Similar procedure to scrolling. So if there is a learner that is scrolling, I apologize. Brandon, I need you to leave, please. Why? If there is scrolling that happens, and that can look, scrolling can happen vocally, AAC, they could hit multiple selections. They could be wanting to tell you to go away, and they might hit, I don't know, let's say marker, then go away. That would be a chain. If they scroll 2 signs together, like Bree was showing, if they scroll 2 vocals together, you want to, again, pause. Do not deliver, don't attend. If they're signers, block their hands. If they're vocal, just look away. Wait for that clear break between an incorrect response and access to that item. So you're going to either put hands down, look away, you're going to wait another few seconds, and then you're just going to immediately prompt. So it's a very similar procedure to what you would be doing if it was problem behavior. Just make sure there's a pause. You don't want to reinforce that chain, because then you're going to have a really unnatural mand, and it's going to chain together because reinforcement came after a chain and not a clean independent response, like Bree had mentioned a little while ago. And we see it happen so many times, it's just natural. You don't think to do that. So you want to be really careful about when access to that item is happening. I believe there was a parent question.
That's perfect.
So how do we handle violent behaviors? What I, like to say, and how we kind of handle it in the school environment, safety is the first and foremost. So you wanna make sure the child is safe, and that everybody around them is safe. So if it is aggression, if it is property destruction, if it's a more intense tantrum, you're gonna first just make sure everybody's safe. Right at that point, you're getting safety. You're still, withholding reinforcement. You're still not providing attention. You're not providing access to items. You're simply just maintaining everybody's safety. So I'm going to block. I'm going to move. I'm going to move anything out of the way that could be destroyed or could be used to throw. I'm going to move if there's other students or siblings around. I'm going to move them out of the way and ask them to go to a different room. And I'm just going to maintain safety until those behaviors stop. You don't want to escalate the behavior by, yelling, or you could quickly make it stop by giving them what they want. But in the future, you're increasing the likelihood that violent or tantrum type behaviors are going to happen again. So withhold reinforcement, make sure everybody's safe. Once the behavior stops for about 5 seconds, prompt them for what they are trying to request, and then deliver. We are hoping to do another session as well on problem behavior and instructional control, which might help a little bit. I see there's a question there about timeouts. It's a little bit unrelated to kind of the requesting, timeouts are only going to be effective if it's attention-seeking behavior, most likely. Timeouts can be an effective punishment, but it depends on the consistency of how you're utilizing it, what the function of the behavior is. There's a lot more effective ways to manage it. If it's behavior that's happening, again, like we're saying, if they just want access to something and they're not using their words to request for that or communicate it, you're going to have a lot better time, more effective time doing that procedure we just talked about by eliminating attention, withholding, waiting, and then giving them an appropriate request. That's going to work a lot better for you than a timeout would, because you're teaching a skill at the same time as you're avoiding reinforcing a problem behavior. That's the key. Punishment only doesn't teach skills. It only takes you so far. It might be able to decrease behaviors, but you're not going to come up with a way to replace that behavior or teach the appropriate behavior or the skill deficit as to why it's happening. So you want to be cautious about that. But if you have any specific questions about behaviors, please feel free to always reach out and email me or ask me for specific resources, and I'd be happy to explain some of those things more elaborately.
Well, we're going to wrap up. So the takeaways are, MAND training should be fun. It's fun for you. It's fun for the kid. They're getting what they want. It can reduce problem behavior. There's a lot of good opportunities for it within the home, and we can help you with that. And being able to request helps our kids become more independent. So any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the chat. Otherwise, you can email us. That's all the teacher emails, my email and Kim's email.
And I think we're hoping to follow up with some type of survey to just give us feedback on the sessions, future topics, timing of if there's a better time of day that works. Just kind of a variety of ways to get your feedback, and parents who didn't attend, maybe we're hoping to get their feedback as well, so we can expand this a little bit. And it's also recorded, so we can get the PowerPoint and the recording to you also to help a little bit and give you some resources.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, thank you guys so much for coming, and yeah, be on the lookout for that survey. Alrighty, so I am going to